profession. Um, and I will say that as a guy, as a man in his 60s, I came into the profession at a time that uh, one will say the country was battling with the reality of a failed republic, first and second, and then military.
And I will say that
had then become a reality. I'll quickly contrast the period of my own emergence in the industry to the kinds of inspiration that drove us into it. Uh, so we were fundamentally looking at the generation that helped birth Nigeria's independence and a little bit of what were the vestiges of that generation and the very immediate uh, uh, generation that followed there. So let me put it then in this way, in this short 6 minutes that I have. I think Nigerian journalism has come a long way. It has emerged out of the history of its own modest beginnings in the late 19th century, as we all know. The first newspaper press in the country, 1859, the first radio, 1937, first TV, 59, and the effective transition to what you would call digital in 1996. Within this whole period, Nigerian journalism helped make a strong case for Nigeria's independence in the 1960s, which meant that this was effectively a journalism that conflated practice with political purpose. Uh, in the early 60s, after independence, to the Republican Constitution of 1963, it helped make the case for a republic. The fathers of the early journalism themselves were, in a sense, part politicians, but professionals in that sense. So the boundaries were not so very clear. And that was why the first generation all ended up being political leaders of the country, Azikwe, Awolowo, Akintola, and all of them. They were all journalists at a point. I think fundamentally what I will say is that if you look at they were also defined by strong causes, a clarity of vision, I will say a sense of history, and they were also nurtured in effectively good writing. Uh, I would say reporting. Today we tend to describe what we do more as storytelling. I don't know whether storytelling was what they did, but they surely did some reporting. Um, so fast forward, this is a time. Um, Nigerian journalism also helped to make a case for democracy. 30 years of military rule, the journalism was always, front and center confronting this military. It's difficult to put an effective and clear name to it than to call it such uh, a day like this requires us to be decent. So I will just say that kind of blot on our history. Um, Post that, in the period of the Fourth Republic, most of what the media had tried to do, I think, was trying to help consolidate on democracy, help to make a case for, well, anti-corruption in some regards, but also at this point, military rule has drained so much of the energy and power of the press. A lot of good hands had left the profession. the profession itself was coming to some early weariness. So I find myself, therefore transversing this modulated and, if you like, variegated landscape of possibility, of failure, and at a point when journalism itself then started to pick a little bit of death. I think there's something transformative about the journalism that then started, say, around the year 2000 and ahead, where a new case for accountability journalism was put on the table, one way or the other. And then, of course, this center, the Wale Soyinka Center, helped pioneer a structured case for accountability journalism when it then proposed that investigative journalism was something that would fit the purpose of this nation. I guess we're all in that same mix today, and today to its own tribute, since it's also celebrating its own 15th anniversary. I think hardly any Nigerian newsroom today describes itself in any sense of respectability without having an investigative desk. So we've come a whole long way, and I don't want to monopolize. I see I've even taken 1 minute out of the 6 that Myla gave me. So I'd like to wrap it up at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. That was quite an interesting history about how journalism has evolved in Nigeria over the years. Of course, seeing how the first, in quotes, the first set of journalists leveraged that into politics, and then the military, and then all that. We are going to have to come back to take 1 or 2 more questions on that. But before we do that, I would just like to ask you, looking through the span of your career, at what point would you say that it had been the most challenging point for the media in Nigeria? Looking through the entire thing, could you pin it to a particular regime or year or something?
I think the years between 1985, effectively, when the military announced itself first by deposing of a democracy. And if you remember very well, you see that the man who helped to usher that period has himself transformed in one way or the other to announce himself as a civilian president, presumably as a Democrat. I don't know whether I want to be as generous as that. But yes, I think that period was when we first understood that the central DNA of journalism, which is truth-telling, being factual, was not a condition, for practice. That the very fact that you engage in that philosophical DNA of your profession made you actionable for trial, for retribution, for punishment. Decree 4 was what it was called then, and it announced itself that truth was not, a condition for. If you remember, 2 journalists went to jail at the Guardian newspaper because what we will celebrate in the profession as a scoop. They found out that the ambassadorial list will be announced tomorrow, and they got a scoop, and they were right. So it's not as if they lied about it. But in the language of Decree 4, truth was not a defense. It only meant that what the masters of the land thought was displeasing to them. So I take it then that period, which then transversed to a more heady period, went through the Babangida period, and then went effectively to the Abacha period, when you had by the 1993 gateway, 1993-94 gateway, what's then called the Great Shutdown, that even government newspapers, radio stations at a point, all about a dozen newspapers, radio stations were shut down because, you know, so this was a period also that led to a whole atrophy in practice, and I think a whole exile, a whole migration from journalism to more lucrative, less hazardous part of the industry, like public relations, advertising, and things like that. So journalism suffered decisively. So at a human cost, as an institutional level, and I think, you know, in its capacity to be effectively an instrument that will ultimately help, monitor or hold democracy that emerged in 1999 truly effective. That's the period that I will put it in that sense.
Thank you very much for that, sir. We have one or two more questions for you, but we'll be coming back to that in the panel discussions. Now we are moving to another person whose journalism was one of the very, very early ones. Okay, so maybe for history backup, I actually joined mainstream journalism just some 6 years ago. And I remember when I was taking my first journey, recommended a few persons to me to read, to look up their work, and get insights before going into the field. And this person about to address us was one of them, as a former senior editor at Premium Times and a managing editor at, of course, the very influential but now defunct Next newspaper. No, I speak of no one else but Mr. Ibanga Isine. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Muyiwa. I hope I have been unmuted because I don't see myself from here. Yes, I am. I am not. I did not work at the rested 234 Next. My newspaper is still in existence. It's Next edition. It just it was born from the womb of the Premium Times. Yeah, I have been a journalist, but not things Dapo has experienced having to run away, involved in that level of going underground and still writing at a very serious risk to himself and others who really practiced journalism of that era. But I joined shortly after we started this democratic experiment, and that was on 1999, 2000, which effectively means I have been in active journalism for over 20 years. When I joined, I remember that we were not, at the time I joined, doing the kind of things that the generation of DAPSI did. We were consolidating on what they had, the gains they had made, and we were not facing the kind of challenges in a similar proportion, to be specific, when in 1999, the country was moving back to democratic rule. But that does not mean we did not have a fair share of challenges. You remember, between that time and now, much more journalists have been killed, than even when Dapsy and the rest were going underground and reporting. Much more journalists have lost their jobs than that era. And so you would want to say that the military was, let me use the word quote unquote, wicked, but a bit humane. Because they did not go against families or threaten every other thing surrounding. I don't really think so. Like what we have from 1999 till this time. So I don't think in Dapsy's era, the government or state actors would compel a media organization or proprietors of media organizations to sack journalists like we've had in these, between 1999 and now. I have worked in media organizations right from NTA to Punch, and then I went into government, came out, I joined leadership, and then got a newspaper. I couldn't sustain it, it died. I called it Guardpost because of, call it politics and not having a direct, a good business point of view, even though I had a good feasibility study. I was basing my assumptions on promises and things that did not work. And you look at Premium Times that was futuristic and did everything and is still one of the best in the country. Now, let me put everything I've said here in perspective. We have been running what I could call transactional journalism. Transactional in the sense that journalism influences the society, and the society has also, to a larger extent, influenced the activities of journalists. During the period under review, we have seen journalism support the evolution of democracy. It has supported and has also helped in stabilizing democracy. But while the media has offered all it can to the service of the country and to the service of humanity, there has not been a reciprocal action on the part of society to the media. In those days where Dapsy spoke so eloquently about, people were not given identity cards and paid starvation wages and asked to still practice journalism, and then they expect them to come up with good stories, investigative reports, and all that. In these days, you see media organizations, somebody establishing a media organization, giving identity cards and allowing journalists to struggle on the tide, just struggle to survive. Sorry that I've taken light here. Okay, it has come back. Now again, you have a situation where inflation on the economy has threatened the livelihood of journalists to the extent that people no longer look at the ethical perspective. People are most journalists are merely surviving, trying to survive. And in surviving, yeah, like in the bush, in the crowd, whatever comes, people do and try to get away with it. So the determination, the commitment that journalists of Dapsy's era had went in mind, except for those who have strong ethical values, probably which they might have learned through mentors. For instance, one of those who influenced my joining or becoming a journalist, even as a child, were people who did very well. The turning point for me was when Delegiwa died. I remember I told my mother that I want to be a journalist, and I don't like what happened to him. And that was a turning point. And then I had an editor. I want to put his name here, Chudi Pride. Chudi Pride was somebody who would drive you like a slave, but he does not enslave you. He wants you to have the best and will push you to the limit. And when you have the best, he rewards you. Now, that was the background I had. And a lot of us who are doing very well today might have been mentored or had influences of people like that. And then we move. Let me tell you that this should be from 2008 till now, I consider as one of the best eras of journalism in Nigeria. The reason is, it is not the age of Methuselah that defines wisdom. It is not even the age, but the contribution. Now, between when 2008, like when Wole Soyinka came up, Center came up, Premium Times was born. Premium Times redefined journalism in Nigeria. And I'm saying this with every sense of responsibility and respect to other media houses that have existed and done very, very well. Premium Times gathered a crop of young Nigerians who really believed and loved this country. And then they gave them a free hand to do the job that they were doing. And an investigation became the core in everything they did. And between the time they came on board, I think around 2010, 2011, and now, they have chalked up all the awards that have been known universally. That does not mean others have not done a good job. But now others are almost trailing, because Premium Times has done what they should have done or what they were doing and put it in very strong perspective. And that's why I made those assumptions or claims. Now, one other very important thing we have to also realize is that the media is not faring very well, better now than it was when there was the military. In fact, you can, this year alone, or between now and last year and now, or 2015 and now, a lot of Nigerian journalists have left the country. Some have been jailed. We have more journalists jailed between 2015 and now than we had between 1999 and 2015. I stand to be corrected. And that is not a good thing. Now, one of the other things we've experienced here is that media houses have been stronger, better equipped than they were when I joined. When I joined Punch in 2002, Punch and a few of media organizations were the only ones that had functional state offices and laptops or computers and functional telephone lines. At that time, you see a lot of reporters, bureau chiefs going to government house to fax their report. And most of those reports were censored because you cannot use a government facility to send a story that is against government. And that was subtle censorship, because you can't take those things and you can go to NITEL to queue to fax your story. It would take forever. And so now, with the coming of the telephone, liberalization of the telecoms industry, we now have internet, and every media organization is now on social media, is now online, including government, and they're trying to, there's competition, there's serious competition, and that has also helped content. And that's why Premium Times and some others, the cable, Next Edition just was born about 2 years ago, and it's trying to also add what it could or it can to what is happening in the industry. So these are some of the very important things. And I think a lot of Nigerian journalists have now realized how powerful they are. And the government is not even, the government knows that. And that's why sometimes when we write some of the things we write, we get away with it because they know it is the truth. They cannot do anything about that. So let me wrap up here, and then for others to also share their ideas.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you so much for that. My apologies for mixing up next and next edition. Yes, so Mr. Ibanga is the managing editor of Next Edition newspaper. They focus heavily on investigation and special reports in Nigeria and of course across Africa. We would come back to him with one or two questions when we get to the general discussions. Now we are going to move to our co-host today, and of course somebody who has monitored the media landscape in Nigeria for longer than my career, of course. I speak of no one else but Miss Motunrayo Alaka. She's going to be telling us basically about the emerging trends that she's seen within the media landscape in Nigeria, and of course what that would mean for the future of journalism within the country. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mayo. It's and I'm very reluctant to say that I am a journalist. I consider myself an insider outsider. Used to produce Lagos Voices. I've done the media, and to do that, because the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism is a knowledge-focused organization, we always try to learn from what is happening around. We do a lot of media monitoring. Can you hear me, Maiwa?
Yes, I can hear you. If you could be a little louder, that would help.
Okay. So I was saying that because the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism is a learning organization, we focus a lot on knowledge, and what we do is we do a lot of media monitoring to create programs and to develop the ones that we have. And over time, we've noticed we are always monitoring trends, generally in the media, and then particularly for some bits. And over time, I'll just mention a bit of these trends. DAPSI has started with a part of what I wanted to start with, so I won't go into that. So I did a small SWOT analysis of the media, and the strengths, some of the strengths that we have is that we have an history of impact. The media has always been impactful in Nigeria, post-colonial era, colonial era, post-colonial era, military era, now democracy. The media is impactful. Also, we have generational growth going for us. So 2 generations perhaps are missing in this room: the generation before DAPSI, and then the generation that are still students. But you can actually pick over generations journalists that are solid in Nigeria, which says that somehow the baton has been passed on from generation to generation. We have a lot of issues, but you can pick that. For every generation, these were the great journalists of that time, and that's a lot to have going for us, and it's a good thing. The weaknesses that we see that we have, the big elephant in the room is sustainability. Is the capacity to pay our home bills. What Mr. Dakpolo Oyomi calls good journalism, bad business. We do the journalism, but we can't seem to pay the bills. We can't seem to understand the difference between our social responsibility, the social part of the work we do, and the business part of this work we do. And that makes us weak. Of course, ethics is another issue. The fact that a lot of things are mixed up. Of course, when sustainability is mixed up, compromise is easier. But that notwithstanding, even in terms of professionalism, a lot of things are mixed up. And then, of course, there are so many opportunities, collaboration, and many more. But I'll move to some major trends that I try to highlight The first is something we all know, the fact that, the media is liberalized. The digital age has liberalized media. So gone are those days when we all sit around a television and wait for it to have those blue, yellow, red bars and make a sound and then start. And we watch till 9 and wait till next day. The media is liberalized. Our audience are publishers now, and they are publishing. The challenge with this liberalization, as much as it is good, is that we don't have shared responsibility. When there's fake news in the space, the core media group are still generally the ones that pay for it, because we are all termed media, and people still point hands. And because for us, ethics, they say ethics eats your culture for lunch. Because ethics has been eroded, professionalism has also been eroded. So there's a lot of copy and paste from mainstream media, from social media to the mainstream media, which ought not to be so. We should lead that space. So this liberalization, of course, also a second thing is that we're in the post-truth era. It is difficult we're in the era where people need to check when you say good morning, not because you normally lie, but because we are now all generally doubtful about anything because of the deluge of fake news that is in the space. So every time you're doubtful. So you're in an era where people are questioned, and not just that, people do not want to be wrong. Mr. Simon Kolawole of the Cable said at the session yesterday, he mentioned something he called mob censorship. The fact that, people can get on you on Twitter. I know Rona will soon speak, and she's always, pushing people off her back on Twitter. People can get on you on Twitter for just saying your truth. For saying your truth. People do not want to hear any version of truth or any version of fact except the one that they agree with. And so the media is caught up in this, because then if you publish something, people can mobilize against you and just troll you on social media and make it look like a fact is a lie. Because we're also in a generation of people who are not checking or reading, or who do not question what they see. So it's mixed up. Interestingly, we're also in another trend is that, local is the new global. It is important to connect locally. However, most of our mainstream medias are still in that central place of reporting, which is the presidency, the presidency, the presidency. However, you would see that the CNNs, the BBCs, some of them haven't lost credibility at home, trying to struggle with the same things that we are struggling with, are making, Africa their new space and creating, platforms that focus on Africa. While this is good, the challenge for Africa might be that, maybe just our bad news gets known mostly, because the people who want to tell our news are telling it to also get that into that space and grow their own credibility around it. Another trend I can see is the growth of non-profit news. The growth of non-profit news. A lot of non-profit media organizations, even a lot of mainstream media organizations now receive grants. The Punch receives grants, Daily Trust receives grants, Premium Times. There are a lot of this. And this is a good thing in that we can have some funding that we do not have to look behind our backs to decide what we can report or what we cannot report, because generally these funds are independent. The danger of non-profit is, I welcome it very much, but I want to put it that we need to put it in focus that it is an intervention, it is not the solution. Because ultimately, some of these non-profit supports, they are targeted to a particular thing you can cover, and then some others will run out eventually anyway. So we still do need to build different models that do not just do non-profit, but also cater for other ways of funding the media. I would lastly talk about the trend that I call that just news is no longer enough. It used to be that this mainstream media published and we're just looking forward to reading what they said. But if what you're going to publish tomorrow was published, yesterday, and people have given us different versions of it by the time your paper comes out, then it's no longer enough to just publish that same thing, that same way, which is the struggle that a lot of the mainstream media houses are going through. They publish something, but we read it, on Twitter yesterday, or somebody else even did a video of what happened to us live. So what are you going to do? That is one part of just news is not enough. The second part is the click happy generation, the click happy trend that social media causes. The fact that something has 100,000 likes doesn't mean that it is, it is a fact. It just doesn't mean that it is the truth. The fact that people have retweeted doesn't mean that this is the truth. So the media is now battling with getting the clicks, getting the followers, getting all these things, whereas, they are not necessarily indicators, but the media needs them to now survive. The media needs them to now survive. And these all of these trends, for me, they point us to things. I've just named all of these solutions arrows. So I'm saying the media needs to reflect. There's not enough self-reflection for the media. It's one of the reasons we decided to do this conference. I go to meetings and journalists hijack other people's meetings to discuss their problems. I'm like, why don't you do your own meeting and discuss media problems? We want to talk about other people. We don't want to talk about ourselves. We're not paying salaries. We don't want to talk about it. We want to go and talk about governors not paying salaries, and we want to report that. We have laid off people, but we want to talk about Access Bank laying off people. We don't want to talk about our own. The media needs room for self-reflection. We must self-reflect. We must think about what are our problems, how do we solve our problems, what do we do to move forward. We must review our practices. Is it working? Those audience that those mainstream media used to have, they are not the same audience now. If those audience are still alive, most of them are not on social media. So the media does need to review how it's doing its thing. The last three is to think, return, and reconnect. Rethink our business models, return to the places where we have gatekeepers. You read media publications, or whether online or not, and you see huge gaps. You see pictures that don't fit. You see pictures that don't fit. You see headlines that don't fit. You just see that there is no gate person. There's nobody checking standards. We need to go back to that place where we have people checking standards. And then we need to reconnect to our audience. Audience are important, and we need to reconnect to them. That's where I end. I hear my last mic is on.
Yes, thank you. I was actually going to ask you a question. Okay, actually I have two questions, but let me just take one. Take the other one at when we are discussing fully. And the question would be: I understand that the Wole Soyinka Center, I've seen the result of some of your media monitoring in the past. Speaking of solutions now, would it be possible for the center, or perhaps any other organization within the space, to monitor the media on these key issues of welfare, of disparities between headlines and pictures, like the general errors that you raised? Would it be possible to have like a monitoring of that, and maybe a monthly report or a quarterly report on how the media is doing with respect to some of these issues?
Yes, it is possible, and some of it is already going on. Like during the COVID time, we did a monitoring of what the state of media in during COVID. The monitorings that we also do, we try to engage some media houses that we monitored, and we engage their management to say, we noticed this and this about you. Of course, this is done privately, and we give the feedback so that we also learn from the media houses that we are monitoring. We hear their side of the story. For instance, we're doing a monitoring on oil and gas, coverage of oil and gas by media houses. When we went around, we realized that, and from our monitoring too, we realized that oil and gas is often under business beats,
Yes.
or energy beats. How do you get, and then, maybe there are 5 reporters covering business, and oil and gas is a part of it. How many in-depth reports practically are you going to get from 5 reporters covering the whole of that thing called business? How many in-depth reports are you going to get on oil and gas in it? So yes, there's a space for that. And I know that myself and Mr. Loyem have spoken many times about doing a media barometer. We'll look to do that hopefully next year to better check ourselves. And more conversations like this would also help.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're moving to the next speaker, who, of course, probably a number of us are excited to hear from her. She's, some of the cracks that Ms. Motunrayo has put in this table, she's just going to break the entire table altogether. I speak of no one else. Of course, in Nigeria, they are just, if you are counting on, you can barely count on one hand the number of Emmy-nominated journalists we have, and she happens to be one. So she's going to be speaking to us about some of the ethical issues, how we can actually build credible journalists and ethical media houses within the country. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Premium Times and the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism is like family to me, because I've encountered Mr. Dapo at a time when he was supposed to be assassinated for doing his job. And he miraculously survived, clearly, because here he is, as usual, years on. And then they also gave me this Wole Soyinka Prize in 2013, which was good. So this is like being home. And I say this because you are definitely then going to hear me speak as if I'm speaking to my family members. And I'm going to keep it real. So the email I got, I just called it up and I'm going to read it out. I'm supposed to speak on the how and the requirements for encouraging a new generation of ethical journalists, and then highlight how the media can build credibility with ethics and professionalism. Right, so I'm going to start with journalists. I have a few steps which I can say will work because they worked for me in 17 years working as a journalist. And I've had the privilege to be in between generations. So I've been in the newsroom, and then I'm also sort of still able to be a millennial while all this is going on, this new journalism that our elders just spoke about. And then, of course, I had a father who was a veteran, so I sort of have all those perspectives. So I'm going to squeeze all of them and say the first thing you need to do as a young journalist right now, you need to have a side income. My first side income was selling kerosene by the bottle. Then I moved to selling fairly used clothes. And then, as small money started to enter hand, as we say in Nigeria, they were no longer fairly used clothes. They were like clothes off the rack. I can still tell you that a few years ago, I was selling handbags, leather handbags. Let me tell you why I continue to do it. First of all, I really like money, okay? Second of all, you need independence as a journalist. That independence is not going to come from your salary, no matter where in the world you work, right? It's not gonna come. There's just no need. I will keep it real with you. I don't advise you to sell kerosene by the bottle. It was frustrating because kerosene can evaporate. I advise you invest. There are a lot of apps now where you can invest money, get a little farm, whatever you need to do, get a side hustle. Why? Point number 2, speak truth to power, especially the power within. You cannot speak truth to power if you cannot take care of yourself. Poverty is one of the strongest forms of media censorship. I'm going to repeat it. Poverty is one of the strongest forms of media censorship. I say this as a father as the daughter of a father who was a journalist, who was materially poor. You cannot speak to government people most of the time if they offer you money and you know you need that money. Of course, contentment has to come with it because there are some people, they can have all the world, but I'm talking about basic hunger. The same way you cannot blame people who sell their vote because there's basic hunger. They sometimes do it for their children. so that their children can eat. It's the same way you have to safeguard yourself. Hunger doesn't respect people. Now, when I speak, that's speaking power outside. Power inside is actually in the newsroom, because there are journalists of all generations who will like to censor you because, again, they are eating somewhere. You need to be able to say, I'm not going to do it, and be okay to go home and still have food to eat while you wait for your next job, because I'm sure they're going to sack you. You need to be okay with that. You need to be able to get up and walk away when you need your voice heard, because the cost is not worth it. Just trust me, it's not worth it. And in terms of generations, this is what I'm going to say. You need to understand that journalism and the truth comes before our social, cultural norms, where we must be reverent, we must defer automatically to age. When it comes to the truth, everybody knows me for it. I don't care how young or old you are, because our colleagues died for the truth. Until now, nobody knows who killed them. So a lot of people have sacrificed. I mean, there's people like Dapsy that would have been dead by now because of journalism. So we as journalists, we are now supposed to go and dirty the pool. What then was their sacrifice for? You know, you have to ask yourself. Speaking truth to power, increasingly in this world of collaboration, there's another there's another type of censorship, and that is censorship by cross-border collaboration. I'm very sure people know what I mean. You're supposed to collaborate with somebody outside the country or something, or abroad, and they want to take over the news agenda. They want it to be about the suffering Africans, the suffering women. If you don't have a side hustle, if you don't have agency of voice, you will have to do it. You'll find yourself doing it, and you will wake up one day without the right to complain that Africa is being reported a certain way because you've contributed to it. So one of the first things you need to do to guarantee independence of voice, a lot of people make this mistake and place it on the media organizations. No, you have to place it on yourself. You have to be content enough, and you have to find a way to cater for your basic needs. Even when salaries are paid completely, we are talking about living wages. Journalists across the world do not make that much money on the average. So I'm just keeping it real, right? If you want to speak truth to power within and without, and do it well throughout your career and be distinguished, find a second hustle and find your voice. You have to accept responsibility as well. You do not get to say, none of us gets to say, oh, I'm going to blame the older generation, they ruined journalism. What are you doing about it? What do your tweets show about it? You know, if you messed up, if you tweeted something wrongly, you need to own up to it. Quickly, you have to have honor. Journalism is an honorable, so when people commit crimes, it's okay. But when you are in certain professions like journalism, when you're a doctor, when you're a lawyer, even if you don't commit a crime, if you do something that's morally wrong or dishonorable, you're held to a higher standard. You have to remember that and accept responsibility for it. You're not just anybody. The reason why you have to act that way is because if you behave anyhow, people are going to not take you serious. So the choice is yours. What should have been number one, maybe, you know, but I think I'm going to leave the get a side hustle as number one. What is number 4 now is you need to get into an ethics and media law class ASAP, like yesterday. Why? You can save yourself a lot of legal hassle. You can save yourself a lot of problems online where they discredit you if you know the law. Now, which law am I talking about? Again, I'm going to keep it realistic. Nigeria's media law has not developed fast enough with the realities of social media, right? Does that save us from, oh, I'm in Nigeria? No, because everything you tweet and publish and your organization publishes is where? Online. That means I can get up from Germany and say, oh, I don't like what Mayowa published about me. It's destroyed my reputation. So I'm just going to go to the courts in Europe and sue Mayowani's publication, and it will stick. Why? Because you published online. When you publish online, you're publishing to the world. It's the first thing you should know. That means you have to learn about journalism law. Now, how do you do it? Classes are expensive, I get that, but you should try to read up online. There are a lot of resources that explain exactly what the law is, why you should not use a real name when you are referring to something that is still in court, why you should not use a picture of a minor. It will explain everything to you. Please try to do that. Try as much as possible. And if you are in journalism school, listen carefully when they are talking about ethics and media law. It will save you a lot, all right? And then finally, you have to play the long game. I call it the long game. You really have to play the long game. Journalism does not reward you immediately. A lot of the successes I got were in the last decade of an almost 20-year career, right? This is the 18th year I'm going into now. So you have to play the long game. If you're here for money, again, you're in the wrong profession. Totally. If you're here to change lives, if you're here to wake up and be able to look in the mirror, well done, you know? And then finally, you need to diversify your skills. Think of yourself as a business. On this one, you have to be very ruthless. I'm sorry. You have to be very ruthless. You have to say, look, I'm a business. And so you take yourself seriously, have some structure. You know, where's the email that people should use to reach you? If it's sources, if it's people asking you to come and speak. Where have you put everything you've published? Where did you put it so that somebody can come and speak to you? Go to mockrack.com, make a free portfolio. Anytime you want to talk to a source, show them that portfolio. That alone gives you access 70% of the time. And I say this because that's what I do. People that I've never met before, they don't know me. When I talk to them, I put my Mockrack portfolio link there. So please, and then when I say diversify, it's not just learning to be multimedia. So if you are print, it's better you go and start learning how to cut audio. I'm telling you, go and start learning how to shoot video. Because me at almost 40, I'm carrying cameras and trying to, it's not easy, right? But if you want to practice and you don't want to be bamboozled, if you don't want to be the type of person that will keep apologizing because you fell for a deep fake, you need to be able to recognize what a deep fake is. So please do the work. And if you can, do not look down on your on yourself if you have a second degree. It's actually superpower. If you've done the sciences, you can do a short journalism course. Your first degree was in journalism. There's no problem going back to go and take a short course in microbiology or a short course in agricultural or vet science, even if it's like a 4-week seminar, a basic seminar. This gives you superpowers. So when you report on stuff, you actually really know it. And then just to quickly run down through my thoughts for how the media can build credibility. The first thing, we have to self-regulate ASAP. ASAP. We have to register the media houses, the news websites. We have to have an ombudsman because, as Moturaya said, people will commit all sorts of media crimes and it's everybody that it will fall on. As they say, it is not the person who poops on the floor that suffers. It is the person that has to clean up the poop on the floor, right? So as far as I'm concerned, we need a registry so that people know who the serious people are and who the pretenders are. A quick example in Germany. If you want to practice at optimal level in Germany, you should be a member of the Deutsche Verband. Now, that's an associate, it's like our NUJ in Nigeria. Why is it important? Do you know that when you apply for some jobs, most of the time when you apply there, they will put what association are you a member of? The first one is the Deutsche Verband. They know immediately that if you're not a member of that, it's somehow. And then periodically, the Deutsche Verband will ask you, what have you done? Send us your, send us links to your work so that they know that you're actively working and they see, how serious you are. I think Nigeria can learn from that.
Thank you very, very much for that exhaustive explanation of course, how a journalist can step up to the challenges we're facing now. Thank you very much. We're quickly going to run to the last but not the least speaker for today. And she started her career. She's a broadcast journalist with the British Broadcasting Corporation, that BBC. She in 2017 won the BBC World News Komladumo Award. She's done quite some reporting across Nigeria, the Northeast, and of course outside the country. She also moderated the first Financial Times Nigeria Summit in 2018. That's no one else but Amina Yuguda. She's going to be speaking to us also on how to basically groom the kind of journalists that we will need for the next generation. As Mutua said earlier, that we have missing in this room the generation before DAPSI and the generation that are students. But looking at the list of participants, I can see a number of people within the next generation who are here with us. So she's going to be putting us through how we can groom the next generation of journalists. Please, you have the floor.
I'm finding it difficult to share my screen. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I think maybe I can't share my content, so the host can, because they have my slides already, so the host can share it. I'd really appreciate that.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, I think you should try sharing now. Right.
It's taking a lot of time, so I'll just start.
Okay, it's up. The slides are up, I guess.
So thank you very much, Mayowa. I really appreciate the fact that a Northerner is coming to this conversation. As we all know, Lagos is the media capital of Nigeria. And more often than not, you know, the balance and the storytelling is usually tilted in favor of Lagos and down south. So I appreciate that opportunity to not speak for the whole of Northern Nigeria, but to speak of my experiences as a Northern girl coming to this conversation. I'm going to quickly pick up from something Miss Maya Rona said, and it really resonated with me. So I'm going to talk about that a bit before I delve into, you know, what my major thesis is this afternoon. So she talked about the global news agenda, not factoring what our realities are on the ground in Africa. That often times, you know, foreign media, international media try to paint Africa as a dark continent, you know, as people who need aid, and not mirroring the realities on the ground, on the continent, and in this case, in Nigeria. So if you look at the picture I have on the screen, there's a Hausa proverb at the top that says, Anaga doki kanaga gura. It's a lesson in perspective. What that translates as loosely is, we say, look at that beautiful horse, and you say, look at all that dust. It's a lesson in perspective. So we all come to a conversation with our nuances, with our preconceived notions, with our perspectives gained from other experiences that might not necessarily translate into what that picture is telling us. And so in this case, you see a beautiful horse. This picture was taken at my backyard. And that's a horse called Lionel, named after a security consultant. And when I look at this picture, what I see is a beautiful horse, but someone else sees all that dust. I'm reminded of a social media post, not just long ago, maybe last month or so. There was a story about, it wasn't a journalistic story though. It was just someone posting something on social media. It was a Sukwa, a horse racing that happened in one of the suburbs in Kano. So it was very dangerous, but it was exciting for the people in the horse race. The one mistake that they made was to do such a difficult sport in an area that's densely populated. So of course there were a lot of injuries, there were a lot of people who hurt their head and all of that. But the thing is, when that post came on social media, there was a lot of derogatory remarks. So you know how the N word is considered derogatory? So there's certain words in our culture that don't literally mean what they mean to others. So you see things like aboki, malam, all this kind of derogatory statements. The literal meanings of those words are not such a bad thing, but the influences of culture that you attach to those words really have a negative effect on us. And so when I say that we come to a story with different perspectives, it'll probably be more effective if we try as much as possible to put yourself in a situation of the consumer of that story. So it's not necessarily about what your experience is of other cultures. It's better about what the reality is on the ground. And so if you're sitting in the comforts of your social media world, and you don't have an experience of what it means to be a Nigerian, to be an African, to be a Northerner, you really do not have the authority or the credibility to comment on what's going on the ground. And so there's so many of experiences like that that, account for the misconceptions and disinformation in today's media age. The next slide, please. If you can give me the next slide. Okay, so I essentially just spoke about perspective, perception, and preconceived notions. And so one very common sort of cliche about Northern Nigeria, and remember, I'm giving you my insights as a local journalist operating from Nigeria in Yola, for you to have a better understanding of what our realities are. And that's essentially what journalism is. I come to journalism as a storyteller, because I believe that's the most effective way to talk about policy, to talk about economic issues, to talk about the millions of problems that we have in Nigeria. No doubt, Nigeria is in a serious and grave position. But the point is, how do you translate that reality? It has to be truthful. It has to be truthful. But what are the nuances of that story? And so in Northern Nigeria, we have the statistics of having a large mass of illiterates. We have across the country, 10.5 million children who are out of school. In my hometown, about 500 of those children come from my own town, my hometown. But is that really the case? If English is the means of communication officially, if it's the policy, official policy language in Nigeria, does that mean that someone who cannot express themselves perfectly in English is an illiterate? So we need to refocus our ideas or our agenda on what the equitable statistics are, or what the equitable standards are for comparison. So you see a lot of almajiris or beggars with bowls roaming the streets of northern Nigeria, and someone says, oh, they're all illiterates. Are they really illiterates? These are children who have learned in the Arabic script, just like we have English as an English script, we have a Chinese script, we have a Arabic and different kinds of scripts. So these are children who have memorized 114 chapters of their holy books in Arabic script, and they can actually write in Arabic script. So are they illiterate? What is the basis for condemning them to being backward and not deserving of our attention? So we must think about the nuances of Nigeria. It's a country of over 500 languages, over 250 ethnicities. Do not come from a high horse or a pedestal judging, looking at an experience that you have no idea of what the reality is. If I can have the next slide, please, because I understand I have just about 2 minutes left for my presentation. Can I have the next slide, please? I honestly wish that I could have shared my screen myself, so it would have made the process a bit faster. So for my first picture, in the background with the horse and someone standing, there was a tree. And this is a closer up picture of that tree. It's something called the yellow geisha. So I remember when I was reporting I was working with a foreign media at the time. I was reporting from outside the country. And we were going to come on assignment to East Africa. And all of my colleagues were excited, like, oh, we have to, get ready for this trip. We have to go to the travel clinic. We have to go and get all our shots and immunizations and what have you. And the major concern for most of them was, I don't want to die of malaria. They're all so terrified. And I said to them, I have malaria all the time. I get malaria all the time. It's not a big deal. But to see the terror in their eyes when they thought about the prospect of getting malaria, they were so worried about it. So we went to the travel clinic and got all our shots. And because I was working with a foreign media organization at the time, it was compulsory. And I really appreciate the fact that they cared so much about my health to make sure that I got, special drugs and special shots to prevent me getting malaria. But just a few days ago, I was working with another colleague here, and I said to him, oh, I have a terrible headache. And usually when I have malaria, this is one of the signs. So I feel like I'm coming down with malaria. And he says, well, okay, you should go to the backyard and get some stems of the yellow geisha. You should get some leaves of the mango tree. He just told me about a lot of concoctions that I have to put together and drink, and I'll feel better. I was a bit skeptical at first, but I tried it. And would you believe that within an hour of drinking that concoction, or should I say magic potion, I felt better. My malaria I didn't have to take any drugs. And what that points to you, this is a metaphor for our reality today. You should not use the solutions that have happened in foreign countries, in the international community, to apply it to Nigerian situations. Okay, so I was reading a book about a book called Prisoners of Geography by Tim Marshall. And he said, one of the points he raised, and which I find very sort of sketchy, is that one of the reasons why Africa refused to develop, according to him, is that we were unable to, we have diseases like malaria and, yellow fever and what have you, stopping us from developing. And I dispute that fact. That's his perspective of what happens in Africa. We have local herbal solutions already here. And if malaria was the reason that stopped us from developing, obviously things like this wouldn't have been found. It's the same thing that applies to the COVID-19 situation. In COVID-19, we all realize that we're on our own. So the other countries didn't really care about whether or not we were going to survive. There was an NGO that came out and said we'd have bodies lying on the streets of Nigeria because of COVID, and we had an inadequate medical or health service. But that isn't the case. That doesn't take away from the seriousness of COVID, but we need to look to homegrown solutions. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time. I'd love to go through to the rest of my slides, but
I understand that. Can I just ask you a question here now? Speaking of homegrown solutions, looking at, of course, you also raised the issue of having a lot of people from northern Nigeria who have memorized the entire Quran, and they have, we cannot necessarily say they are illiterates. So with homegrown solutions, how do we draft in people who want to be a part of this profession but are left out as a result of some of these limitations? What do you think?
Well, to me, that's interesting that you asked that question, because already there's some corporations or media outlets working on that right now. We have BBC, Igbo, Hausa, Yoruba, and we have even some local news outlets that, produce content in the local languages. So it's really remarkable that we're starting to, sort of cherish our own cultural identity. And that's what needs to happen for us to have a revolution in the industry.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we are going back to the questions now, and I'm going to be throwing one or two questions to some of us. Please, when the question comes to you, you would have about a minute to answer the question, so we can get around to most of the questions that we have. Now, I've seen a number of questions from Mr. Uche Anoniru. And I'll probably like to summarize it in one question. And that question would be, we know that there are quite a few credible online and, of course, traditional media outlets in Nigeria, but we also have hundreds of others who are not not that credible. And when the audience are interpreting what is happening within the media, they lump us all together. So this question would go to Mr. Dapo Oloriyomi. How does the credible section of the media separate itself in the eyes of the audience from the rest of all that is going on within the online space?
Maiwa, I think the first thing is that we have to, how Aristotle says, a life unexplored is a worthy one, is for us to generally understand what we do. We say we are doing journalism. I think, unfortunately, most people think every media practice is journalism. It's not, so all journalism is media, but not all media is journalism. The part of the media which is journalism is a part that is really dedicated to truth telling, to accuracy in reporting, to the practice of verification, that provides some kind of, both for agency and self, a definition of independence. I think to that extent, that's what we should then therefore guard, those enabling meaning of what journalism. So we must just continue to be very factual in our reporting. We must give primacy to verification and try as much as possible to continue being independent in our practice. Every other thing will fall by the side. I think to the extent that we can double down on these qualities, which are distinctively journalistic, that's the only way we can help separate ourselves from other practices. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm coming to Mr. Ibanga and then Rona shortly. Mr. Ibanga, you, of course, have, like you mentioned during your presentation, you've spoken about setting up a media house, setting up a media platform, and then not being extremely successful at it, and then setting up another one which is going on well at this time. Do you think that there is a conspiracy of silence within the media not to report the media? So, for example, there was like a report making the rounds maybe like a week or two ago about some activities within some media houses within Nigeria, but the media never gets to report those. So is there that silence, and how do we deal with it?
There is seemingly, it's a seeming situation like that, but it's not really the truth. Because, you see, by the very nature of our operations, we are not supposed to be the ones in the limelight. The journalist is supposed to serve public interest. And that orientation we had, that it's not about us, has affected the psyche, the thinking in the practice of journalism. That even when we are crying, when we are suffering, we do not bring those things to bear on our stories. We do not expose those things. And because of the orientation we also have in the newsrooms, a dog does not eat a dog. It has tended to seep in, and people believe that you cannot talk about what has happened. In fact, I just finished a research on the impact of COVID-19 on the media in Nigerian journalists, and the findings are extraordinary. And Daphne was talking about how we could ask a question of how we could separate the real thing from the chaff, the real media organization. There is absolutely a necessity for media literacy on the part of our audiences, on the part of media consumers. And who will do this training, who would put them through to understand how to do fact checking, how to know a website from the other. It's what we don't know, but there must be some level of media literacy. Now, back to the question you asked me. We do not put ourselves out, and that has affected but yesterday, you saw something happened in the media. A journalist was involved in a situation, and it was all over the place. Media organizations reported that incident, and when it was resolved in the evening, the media was also. But one other thing that stood out from that spontaneous action was that everybody was concerned. There was no media organization that tended to hide it, because it was the dog should not eat a dog. So that shows we can do it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Ronald, do you think that a dog should not eat a dog in this context of media reportage? We can't hear you. Your mic is mute.
I'm going to go back to what I said, point 2. We must speak truth to power. So I'm going to say it clearly. The media did a very bad job of that particular reportage, because you had a victim of domestic violence who was less than 6 weeks out of a cesarean section. And again, I say this thing, ethics. Ethics shows that that woman is under serious physical and psychological harm. You cannot be interviewing her. You have to think of the safety of the person. So to my eternal shame, I saw journalists sticking microphones in the face of a victim. And I think that added another layer of pressure. Let me tell you, if I was in the newsroom and my editor sent me to go and interview her, I would tell him I absolutely could not do that. You do not resolve a case of assault with a press conference. You resolve it by taking the victim to doctors, psychologists, and the assaulted person to the station to give a statement. So journalists have to, this work is not just one person. Journalists have to step up, or else they will continue finding themselves reporting the same things and reinforcing terrible stereotypes. So for instance, that woman has now had her pictures everywhere, and she's been, stampeded. And I'm not going to blame anybody. I'm not even going to blame the media houses, I'm going to blame the actual journalists that thought it was okay to do that to that woman. So we have to take responsibility. We have to distinguish, as Mr. Dapsy has said, we have to distinguish, I saw wrote it here, distinguish yourself from the rags. We are not different from the governments, the inept governments we criticize, the heartless governments we criticize, the governments who murder. We're not different from them if we do the type of journalism, the shameful journalism that happened yesterday. It's an absolute disgrace. And I can tell you that if that happened in Germany, for instance, if a journalist was unprofessional enough to go and talk to somebody who was like that, that woman can turn around and sue and say she was under duress. Viewers can turn around and sue the state. Yes, for what happened. So we're going to have to really seriously speak to ourselves. And finally, the last thing I would say that will really help the media to have some professionalism and credibility is you have to publicly rebuke mistakes, publicly err and apologize for your mistakes, publicly rebuke erring practitioners, the same way you publicize your news. When you find out it's a mistake or your staff made a mistake, you have to be as loud. Also, I would like to see more of our media houses protect the journalists from cyber trolling and attacks. A lot of the time, Motrayo pointed to it, a lot of the time, I basically have to protect myself. And I like to think I do a very good job because I don't have a censor, I don't have a filter. But if I was under contract, I might have a bit of a filter. And so if you don't want your journalists being so open to this type of harassment and all this type of mistakes, you need to stand by them. And pay attention to the future.
Thank you, Ronald. Let me bring Motrayo in at this point. You said that from your media monitoring, you contact maybe the newspapers and then you have conversations with them. From what Ronald just said, do you think that we should actually have a situation where we actually publicly publish what we see from this media monitoring?
Oh yes, we've actually published a number of them. If we publicly publish, what happens to politicians, we should be ready to publicly publish what happens to us. We are not purists and we're not perfect because we're in the media. We make mistakes often. The integrity is forced to, as much as possible, have, the system in place to minimize those mistakes. But when we do make them, to have that responsibility and humility to own up to them and as human beings and take redress. Like Una said, I have not been able to get over watching that woman.
Yeah.
And again,
Thank.
the part you did not mention, which I'll quickly mention, Maiwa, before you chase me out of here, is agendarless. Is agendarless. We do not understand, is agendarless. The fact that we're a moral organization, we must understand what it takes for a woman to go through that. But the man has apologized, and the man, is now suddenly right. And the media is guilty as society.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to Amina now. You said something while you were speaking about Lagos being the capital of the media, and I also understand that somebody mentioned that yesterday about the Lagos Ibadan press, the Lagos Ibadan media. How do you think that we can actually have more media presence in northern Nigeria and maybe some other parts of the country, such that we don't have this so-called imbalance of saying the media is heavily focused on this region of the country?
Hard truth for all of us is that we up north have to invest more in media. Nobody's going to come from Lagos and set up a media station just to hear the northern voices. So we have to take ownership of our own responsibilities. So there has to be more northern elites willing to invest in the media. Unfortunately, as it is right now, not a lot of people are interested in, funding media. And the few that do have private stations are heavily leaning towards, broadcasting in Hausa, which is our language, and we're really comfortable, we're really proud of. But if you're constantly broadcasting in Hausa, how does someone down south understand what you're talking about? So we need to be the ones to change the narrative. We can't rely on anyone coming from Lagos to come and set up media houses in the north. So it's something that we should work on, not anybody else, I think.
Thank you very much. As we are gradually coming to the end of this conversation, there's a question from a student journalist here about how students can speak truth to the school authorities, and of course, how best can a student do that? I would like to, maybe I should take that. It seems like I'm the youngest on this panel. So, yes. So for that particular question, I would say that I started my journalism in school and reported a few things that were troublesome, in quotes. There was a particular story I wrote once. It was about the feeding situation in the University of Ibadan. And after gathering all the evidence, everything, I sent out an executive report to the university authorities, pre-informing them about what I was going to publish. And of course, it wasn't to ask them that, should I publish or not? It was just to tell them that this was coming, and we need you people to do something about it. Because more often than not, as student journalists, sometimes the authority pretends not to see what we've written. But when you stick it up in their noses, they would definitely react to that. And so, speaking truth to power, I know that there is the chance of getting punished, suspended, rusticated, whatever. We've seen situations like that, even at one of the leading universities within the country. But I would also say that there is also a place for thinking about your own safety. And when I say safety, I mean graduating from the university. So you might need to come into the space, maybe with mainstream journalists, explain what is going on, share your findings with them. And if they come from above to help you publish that, as we've seen in a few situations we've seen in the university, you might be able to get around the problem without getting into problems. So everyone in the room, all the panelists, we are going to go through like a quick 30-second roundup of what we've had today. You're going to basically tell us that what your last words will be basically for the new generation of journalists and of course for the new media landscape going forward. I'm going to start with Motunrayo.
Let's be intentional about the change that we want for the media. Collaboration is the name of this.
Thank you. Mr. Banga, please. Your mic is muted.
Okay. With COVID-19, the landscape has changed, and journalists, like Ronald said, should acquire other skills by the side, but also they should have skills in digital journalism and be able to operate and work remotely instead of the office. So there is a need for getting new skill sets.
Thank you. Miss Amina Yuguda.
Okay, so my final words are that we're in a digital age. It's the era of artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things. The journalists should make the most of this technology because it can do wonders for us. But do not forget that the great elders paved the way for us. So we must also incorporate leadership and skills from what they've learned, the lessons they've learned during their careers. We must incorporate it in today's journalism. So it's a collaborative effort with the great elders and the younger generation, taking advantage of the Internet of Things, the artificial intelligence, all the technology that we have today. Do not forget truth, accuracy, fairness, and balance.
Thank you. Rona.
I'm just going to say honor. Have honor. That is going to be the greatest thing that will open doors for you. Be honorable, and always remember you are only as good as your next byline, not the last one. You cannot be in this, finally, you can't be in this profession and be a coward. You're going to have to be very brave. You're going to have to try to be brave.
Thank you very much. And to the king of boys.
Anyway, you have to tell me here when next you see, but I'm borrowing the words and thoughts of the Martinique psychiatrist who worked all his life in Algeria when he said that every generation must discover its own mission and fulfill it or be free. And I think that the central mission of this new generation is to be able to work out how to answer the business model of journalism just totally collapsed. We really need all those.
Thank you very much, everyone who joined us today, from the panelists to the attendees. Thank you very, very much. Tomorrow we're going to be having the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism Awards. It's going to be at 4 to 6 p.m. at NECA House, Ikeja. And of course, we are going to be following the COVID-19 guidelines. So when you're coming, come with your masks. And I'm sure that they will provide sanitizers at the entrance. Thank you very much. It was a very great conversation we're having here today. We'll continue the intergenerational conversations online. And of course, so the journalists coming in now and those of us here can learn from each other on what to do for the future of journalism. Thank you very much and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Maiwa, you won't let your audition before you start picking calls, yeah?
Ogadapsi.
Ogadapsi, you should know that.
Ogadapsi, how are you there, sir? Long time. This white beer
Thank you all for coming. I can see you guys leaving.
That white beer.
Thank you.
Babe, see Brona. Looking so take away.
It's good.
That's beer.
Thank you, Andrew Williams. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, mommy.
Thank you, everybody. Sorry.
Bye-bye.
Don't start the talk, bro.
Thank you, Michael, Ishola, DME. Thank you. That's how you say bye-bye. Thank you, Ruth. Now,
the reason why I'm soliloquizing. The things where I see, where I hear, I know go lie past me. Oh, I want to tell the story, but I've got to tell it from the starting. Yeah. About a man, a woman, and a girl begin. Wait till the second verse before my story begin. If you ask me, who I go ask?
Andrew seems to want to rebroadcast it. Thank you all. Thank you all. Abdusalam, thank you. I see you.
If you ask me, no matter for brown, now who I go ask? Oh, the woman travel, leave her daughter with the husband home alone. Hey, you know, say I think you see the man is daughter and then they play strong play. Yeah, they want that I did not see. Who judge her, she said, I'm the only. I don't know what to say, I don't know what to tell my mother. It be like say she gets a baby. If you ask me, now who I go ask? No matter where we see go, it always stops. Don't be me the talker. Heavy for now. Oh, if you ask me, no matter for ground.
Who I go Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
But all this type of things they happen every day. Speak out or take some action, I beg you no delay.
That's it.
Make my task was
I usually leave when the last 10 people.
Now who I go ask?
Yeah.
Ambassador go dey chop, and governor go dey chop, and president go dey chop. When I say make we jump, we go jump. Ambassador go dey chop, and president go dey chop, and governor go dey chop. When I say make we jump, we go jump. No before here with them born Jesus. Yeah, my country problem it passes us. Good thing, good. Because now we be our own problem. Now who can reason well. Ambassador go dey chop, and governor go dey chop, and president go dey chop. When I say make we jump, we go jump. Some people go somersault, them dirty headache we go drink Panadol. Meanwhile president go dey chop, and governor go dey chop. Now they money there, the tiffy come major. When they make this suffer Conde. Suffer yakbam tukun. Tukutun, where they make people sukun. Tukutun, money in one tun. Tukutun, suffer yakbam tukun. Tukutun, do you well. And then they laugh you well. And then they say I see the shell. I stand the flange you well. Yeah. My people suffer well. Police they slap them well. Hungry they wire them well. Ambassador go the chop, and governor go the chop, and president go the chop. When they say make we jump, we go jump. Some people go somersault. Them dirty headache we go drink Panadol. Meanwhile president go the chop, and governor go the chop. My people self they fear too much. We fear the thing we not see. One day all of us go die. We always get reason to fear. Fight for your right to you go the fear. Police go slap you, you go the fear. Fight for your picking them, you go the fear. We go the fear. Ambassador go the chop, and governor go the chop, and president go the chop. When they say make we jump, we go jump. Some people go somersault. Them dirty headache we go drink Panadol. Meanwhile president go the chop, and governor go the chop.
As a people with one song, with one voice, we're a nation undivided and poised. We will take a stand and build our land in faith to defend what is ours. Here we are as a people with one heart for one cause. We're determined to rebuild